This interview is brought to you by Burned Up Coaching and Becoming Your Greatest Possible Self and the 21-Day Challenge. And if you're an entrepreneur or a high achiever and you're committed to breaking through your BS, you feel like you've been plateaued or stopped or stuck or just not really stepping into your greatness, then the 21-Day Challenge is the perfect remedy to reignite your passion, your self-belief, and your success so you succeed like never before. So what we'll do is we'll get clear on your statement of purpose, your life purpose, your vision, your mission, your strategy, your objectives. You'll break that down into bite-sized steps so that you can tackle it on a 6-month, 3-month, 1 month, 1 week, and 1 day basis. And then what we'll do, we'll focus for 21 days is super intensely on what are the habits, the disciplines, the mindsets to be able to achieve those big dreams and purposes and goals so that you can step into your greatness. So that's the 21-day challenge. Very high touch, daily check-ins, weekly deep dive calls, all one-on-one with me, having lots of conversations to make sure that you are empowered, fired up in achieving your greatness. So send me a message if that is something that you are ready for to step into your power and succeed at your 21-day challenge goal. So email me, chris@beyourgps.com, or send me a message on Facebook. I look forward to speaking to you about your 21-day challenge. Next up is the iTunes review of the week. And this week, it's by the one and only Crystal Ray. Crystal says, Chris is amazing. Chris is absolutely awesome, and I really love his energy. He is truly passionate about what he does, and I love what makes this show unique. Such an inspirational podcast. Thanks so much, Crystal. And if you want to give us a review, go to beyourgps.com/iTunes, and you can give us a review there, or you can search Becoming Your Greatest Possible Self on iTunes and give us a review like that, or through Facebook, you can search Becoming Your Greatest Possible Self there and give us a review there as well. We appreciate the feedback so that we can grow into our greatest possible self. Now, for the woman of the hour, Miss Ann Sugar, she's going to be coming on here in a minute, so make sure you stay tuned because this interview is going to be powerful. How to lead with empathy while thinking about the business. We're going to dive into some really, really juicy topics, how to step into your power, your boundaries, the love for yourself, and really connecting with other people and understanding them and feeling them and really communicating with them while keeping those business priorities and business goals and objectives at the forefront of who you are and what you're doing. So let's talk about Ann. Let's get this intro pulled up for her. So Ann Sugar. Ann Sugar is an executive coach and a speaker who has advised top leaders at companies, including TripAdvisor, Sanofi Genzyme, and Havas. Ann serves as an executive coach for Harvard Business School Executive Education and has guest lectured at MIT. She is also a contributor to Harvard Business Review. Prior to becoming an executive coach more than a decade ago, Ann served as a senior leader in the advertising industry, where she oversaw a team of 75 employees as senior vice president of media at Digitas. She managed media planning for Fortune 500 clients, including General Motors, Federal Express, and Delta. She draws on her extensive management experience, as well as her in-depth training and coaching methodology to advise senior executives and high performers transitioning into leadership roles. And we're absolutely blessed to have Ann on the show today. Ann, are you ready to rock this?
You bet. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Absolutely. Absolutely. My pleasure and totally your pleasure too. We're going to have a lot of fun here today.
Absolutely.
It's going to be great. It's going to be great. So definitely excited to have you here. Thanks for making the time, taking it out of your schedule to really give to our audience to step into our greatest possible self with your wisdom and your experience, which is extensive to say the least. You know, it's awesome what you've accomplished just reading it off the intro. We're going to get into a little bit more about what you're working on today and what you stand for in a second. Before that, we always talk about the theme of the day, which today is defining moments. So Ann, how has this concept of defining moments played a role in your life? What does that mean for you?
I think there's a couple of things, right? I can think about it from specifically some of my clients and also myself. So I think from a client perspective, I think it's really one of the things I think in defining moments is about owning who you are and accepting that you're a great leader, right? Because many times as leaders, we get all this noise, right? That, you need to flex a little bit this way when you presented this way. But I think it's a defining moment can just be actually simply knowing that you're good enough, right? At what you do. And a lot of the times when I'm coaching a lot of these folks that we were just talking about, it's actually about the small details.
Yeah.
We're not talking about these big wholesale changes. It's those
Mm.
1% little increments, right?
Yeah.
Speaking up in the meeting first, owning the
Mm.
fact that you are very creative and maybe the people in the room really aren't, but you're going to share that big idea first.
Right. Right.
So I think while it's not, a big defining moment in our lives, and we do all have them, right?
Right.
We have those things that trip us up,
Mm.
or we scale the mountain and we say at the end, "Wow!" But it's also can just be small things too.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, that's powerful. I love that perspective because, every guest has a different perspective on this, and I love how defining moments when people think about it, it's like, "Oh, the life-changing events," right? And
Yeah,
of course, it's the first thing that we think of, and the defining moments are each moment of life, the
yeah,
little choices, the little decisions, the
yes,
decision to like you said, speak up in the meeting or kind of stay back and let other people run the show and not really
yeah.
feel heard or feel like you're a valuable part of the team. So I really love that perspective on it, and that's super powerful.
Great, great.
Yeah,
And I think we all, and that I think is so important that you bring up is it can be different for all of us,
yeah,
and it's okay,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. Powerful. I love it. I love it. So tell us a little bit more about you're doing this executive coaching. Tell us more about what you stand for in that and more about it for you.
Okay, so from my perspective, I like to work with folks that are high potential folks that are making these, like I said before, these small little tweaks.
Mm,
And for me, it's really just simply, and I know this sounds kind of trite, but I am people's partners to help them grow
yeah,
to where they want to grow and to
totally.
be simply, actually, just be the best leader that you can be.
Yeah,
Super
that's
simple.
beautiful.
I'm
That's
all about
beautiful.
the simple.
Yay! Yay!
Just simple. So today, what I really want to talk about is just the simple and the practical,
Mm,
because I think that's the most powerful. We don't need a lot of deep management theory. While important,
mm.
I think it's about the simple and the practical.
Beautiful. I love it. I love it. So we're going to be diving into that, and to get to this place where you're at, to be the simple, focused on the simplistic
Hmm.
activities that get the maximum return and results. You had to grow. You had to become, wise through experience, through life's tests and challenges and
Hmm.
tribulations and all that. So take us
Yes.
back along the journey to, really how you got started in coaching as a profession, over a decade now. And, what were
Hmm.
some of those challenging moments in your career growing, from a
Yep.
corporation kind of background into coaching, wherever you want to
Hmm.
take us to have us get to know you a little bit more and just whatever the
Sure.
biggest lessons that you picked up along the way are.
Sure. I think one of the biggest lessons that I've learned
Mm,
is it's three things, and I'll tell you some stories about it. The three things that I really believe for everybody is perseverance, number one.
mm,
I think number two, it gets to hard work. And number three, it's learning or reading. And I think for a lot of us, and I really try to focus on reading,
mhm.
but reading is a key differentiator.
Wow.
I really truly believe that. So perseverance. So let me tell you a quick story about when I was in advertising and I was a media planner. And there were three of us, and we all wanted to be promoted to a supervisor. And moving to media supervisor is a big jump.
Yeah.
And out of the three of us, I wasn't promoted. And it was crushing
Mm,
because I knew that I should, in my mind, I should be the media supervisor. Whether right or wrong, that's what I thought.
mm,
And, now looking back on that, while extraordinarily crushing because I had worked so hard for it, it actually was a good thing because it made me more hungry, number one. I persevered. I got that media supervisor role. And, actually, I got more experience working as a media planner
mm.
that even made me a better media supervisor. And
Wow.
so maybe sometimes, right,
Mm,
we figure, uh, there are lessons, right? And there are reasons, whatever it was.
mm,
And I think too, when we get into perseverance and hard work. So the next piece about hard work, advertising is hard work, right? It's about client service. And I think what's important for everybody out there to really think about is that we all have different careers in our lives.
Mhm.
And for me, after 18 years, client service and advertising just wasn't as fun for me
Right.
anymore. I grew up in the 80s, right, in advertising. I worked on very large brands. It was all about creativity.
Hmm.
Then it started to become about the margin piece, right? And I had to really take a step back and think about what really was important to me from a passion perspective, not a passion about my hobbies.
Right.
Um, because practically speaking, many times I don't believe that some of our passions and hobbies can be our careers,
Right.
right?
Right.
We can, that can be an important component to it, but it doesn't have to be that. So let
Hmm.
me tell, I'm going to go off the ranch just a bit and tell another story about
Perfect.
passion
Perfect.
and hobbies. I was coaching this managing director from an advertising agency, and she is a comic and she is extraordinarily funny, and that is her passion.
Hmm.
And she decided to go off to California, leave advertising, go off to California and pursue that dream to be a comic. And what she found is it's a hard road. You're late night in the comedy clubs, you're not making money. And what she really found out is she really did love advertising. So how could she marry advertising and comedy? And
Mm.
she came back into advertising, but when she would do new business pitches or speak, it was amazing because she was using that comedic
Mm.
timing and the theater of it all. So that's a side note. But and so I think, how can we marry all those things? So getting to the hard work, that I had to do the hard work to figure out that advertising wasn't for me anymore.
Mm.
And that um what was really important were the people. And so over time, it's a very long story. I became an executive coach, went back and got all the certifications, Myers Briggs, all of that.
Right.
And it's hard, right? Changing careers. I was managing a very large department. I had my administrative assistant, and it was just very different going
Mm.
from a large department to a solo entrepreneur. But I don't look back now. There's
Right.
bumps in the road, definitely for sure.
Yeah.
And that gets to the last piece about learning. For me as an executive coach, it's always about continuing to learn about leadership, management, all of the ideas out there
Mm.
that might help somebody. Building habits. I hear that and it's like, oh, there's so much great ideas and research out there on that front.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. I
And I
love it.
know that you're very much an expert on that. So it's very, so and that's the point, right? Is
Yes.
part of this is about specificity as well,
Yeah.
being very specific
Yeah.
on the knowledge that we have. I mean, it's
Mm.
important to be a generalist, but what is that very specific knowledge that you can share?
Mm. Wow. Yeah, the
Is
the
a-
power of specificity makes you an expert, right? Like it's the
Yes.
depth, it's the willingness to go deep, deep, deep into one topic that makes people so valuable. There's experts who get paid, let's say, $10,000 to go fix a problem because they've
Yep.
mastered it. They've spent their life fixing that one thing. They
Right.
may not be good at plumbing, they may not be good at cooking, but they're damn good at that one thing.
Right. Right. So, for example, with habit building, like what you were talking about,
Right, right.
it's very easy to say, do the same thing every day, right? Or whatever. But
Right.
what you're bringing to this
Yeah.
is very specific case studies
Yeah.
and very specific plans. What I'm going to work with you on every single day,
Yeah.
and that specificity is your expertise.
Yeah.
That and that's what, and all leaders should think that way as well.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. So with regards to, diving into the empathy, I know that was a big thing
Hmm.
that we wanted to cover today. What do we need to know? What do we need to know to have this foundation of empathy while keeping an eye on the target and in the
Right.
business growth and overall productivity?
I think So it's one of the biggest topics out there
Mhm.
that I coach on, because some people frankly say, why should I care? Be
Mhm.
empathetic. It's business,
Mm.
right? I had somebody who's a very senior person one time say to me, why should I be empathetic? Right. But at the end of the day, it's all about the people,
Yeah.
just simply that. But there is a point where it's too much,
Mm.
right? And that
Yeah.
you do have to think about the business,
Mm.
and that you do have to think about the numbers. And there are times where you have to make the really hard decision,
Yeah.
and I wrote about this in Harvard Business Review. So, 6 years ago, I had cancer. Everything is fine now, but I had to learn that hard piece about empathy in the business, right?
Mm.
And so I was working with a company, and I was going through my treatment, and they said, we just can't wait for you to feel better. We need to find another executive coach. Now, at first, and I write about this in Harvard Business Review, that's it was shocking to me, and it
Yeah.
felt bad, but at the end of the day, it really is about the business. That
Totally.
person needed a coach right then,
Yeah.
and I couldn't provide that service.
Right.
So, and I interview a lot of people, a lot of other HR people in this article about the balance of that, right? The balance of being empathetic and meeting your team where they are, but that at the end of the day, it is about business.
Mm.
And
Wow.
sometimes we have to make those really hard decisions.
Yeah.
And people ask me the question, okay, so what's the rule of thumb? How do I do that? And there isn't.
Mm-mm.
Because unfortunately, leadership is messy
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah.
And and it's that simple word of being messy.
Mm. Yeah, and
Yeah.
what I hear about that in addition to messy is complex. Is
Absolute
there's
perfect word.
there's so many permutations about what could show up when, in what situation, in what scenario, business models, business industries,
Yeah.
leadership styles, dynamics, team dynamics. Oh my gosh.
Right. There's so, from an empathetic perspective, how many when you think about somebody who's struggling,
Hmm.
what is the point where, I can be empathetic that you have all of these things going on, but I still have to make my revenue numbers,
Right.
right? That's the and there's no secret sauce to that.
Hmm. Hmm. So
And
what
sometimes it doesn't feel good as a leader to have to make those decisions, but you know,
is there practices or things to focus on or pay attention to, key levers to know whether we're on track or off track? Could we go over some of those?
that's a great question. I think that one of the biggest ones is simply first being transparent and authentic,
Mm.
and sitting down with somebody and and really sharing, well, here's what I'm seeing happening, how are you feeling, and having that transparent, authentic conversation.
Mm.
Number two, I think part of it, and this is something hard to coach on, but you can, is using your gut instinct,
Yeah.
right? Where, and I say this to people, where do you feel in your body
Mm.
that, right? When do you feel it? When have you needed to use your gut instinct,
Mm.
right? And that also helps. And then two, I think just as important is leveraging other people on your teams. I feel like sometimes we don't use the expertise of everybody else that's out there.
Yeah.
So for example, leaning on HR, leaning on senior leadership to help
Mm.
you guide, and those case studies. So those are a couple of examples.
Mm. Powerful. So there was be transparent and authentic, which is,
Hmm.
the key. That's like a foundation of empathy is being real, like being
Hmm.
real with people. Because if you're doing it from a place of, well, I just want to understand your emotions so I can get the most out of you, so to speak, with
Right.
that kind of like ruthlessness or what's the abrasiveness behind it
Yes.
that people can see right through, and they could smell it from a mile away kind of thing.
Right. Right.
So it's important to have that transparency of, this is why I'm doing it. This is why I'm thinking this way. What are your thoughts?
Mhm.
And I think
Mhm.
transparency also creates dialogue, and authenticity creates
Absolutely.
dialogue, because it's like, well, here's where I'm at. Here's my authentic position. Here's what I believe. Here's what I stand for. Now, what about you? How do you see this? Let's create some real conversation, some real perspective sharing.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That's it. It's really about the real conversation. And I think part of the underpinning what you're talking about is um, having positive intent, right?
Yeah.
That, and I was speaking with the president of a large organization one time, and he said this, and I think this is really true when we think about being empathetic and being that leader. He said, "I begin every conversation from a positive intent perspective.
Hmm.
That the people who work with me are here to do the right thing."
Yeah.
And I believe that until I gather data otherwise.
Contrary. Right.
Once I gather that data, then I use my gut instinct as to what I should do.
Mm. Yeah.
So that, and sometimes we forget about the positive intent perspective,
Mm.
right? Because we're expecting that there's some sort of miscommunication or somebody's trying to take advantage of me.
Mm.
But starting every conversation from that perspective, or every, you know, thought that you might have about your teams.
Right. Right. That's another way to say it that I've heard is, um, everyone is doing the best that they know how, the best that they can. If they
Yes.
could do better, if they knew how to do better, if they were aware of their, self-sabotaging patterns or behaviors,
Hmm.
or, things that might not be apparent to them, then they would choose differently. Nobody wants to do a bad job. Nobody wants to
Right.
suck.
Right. And I think that that's part of stoicism, right? In
Yeah.
Ryan Holiday's
Yeah.
point of view that, put yourself, or Marcus Aurelius, right, in
Hmm.
his book Meditations, if you put yourself in that person's shoes, you might be doing the same thing,
Mm.
right? So
Yeah.
being authentic from that perspective
Mm.
as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, beautiful. And then as far as like tapping into that gut feeling, what
Hmm.
what is the importance of that in leadership? Why in leadership, why in leading a business to success is that gut feeling even more important to focus on, to harness, to
Hmm.
master, and develop
Hmm.
that those skills and abilities with it?
Right. So it's so interesting, right? Because people think I should just go with the data and the analysis.
Mm.
And here's an interesting story. This portfolio manager that I was coaching uses his gut a lot,
Mm.
and he is the number one. He has the number one fund in
Wow.
this arena that he's in.
Hmm.
And the interesting piece, his secret sauce is he uses his gut. He doesn't always use the numbers.
Mm.
And for him, it's how he gathers the data and sort of it's very hard to articulate, right? He
Right.
feels
Yeah.
where he should go next. It's
Mm.
his gut, it's our intuition. It's, we take in all this data in our brain, and sometimes it's that feeling that we get,
Mm.
that kind of voice that says, don't do that, think about this, fund over there.
Mm.
And it's very interesting. It doesn't, even if you work in an industry that's really based on the numbers,
Mhm.
based on revenue, return on investment,
Mm.
you can still be thinking about your gut and
Hmm.
using your gut.
Hmm. So to be able to use our gut, is it
Hmm.
listening to that internal voice? Is that like to be able to tap into it and develop it? It sounds like it's just being more consistent with listening to it, right?
Listening to it and testing as to whether it's right or not, because
Mm,
sometimes it's not.
right.
And I've asked people, so where do you feel that feeling, right?
That's good.
Because where do you feel it? Because there's a physicality to it.
Hmm.
Of course, you feel it in your gut, your stomach. But I've had people say, yes, I feel it behind my eyes. I feel it, I get this like strange kind of feeling. What it is really stepping back and listening. And
Mm,
almost what I like, a practical tip I tell people to do
mhm,
is turn down the sound in the room.
mm,
If you turn down the sound in the room, it helps you recognize your gut, and it
mm,
also helps you read the room, right?
mm,
Because body language never lies.
mm.
And body language is one of those kind of um, tactics that can help you with gut as well.
Right. Right. So when you say turn down the sound in the room, does that mean like literally turn down the volume on speakers, is that like slow people down in the pace of
Oh,
things? Is that
no, I'm
stop
just
a
saying
meeting?
turn down. Right. I wish we could all just not talk sometimes, right? We obviously both like to talk. Yeah. It really is just figuratively.
Mhm.
How can you just take a step back and watch people in the room?
Right. Right.
And that will help with listening as well. And
Yeah.
listening is a core component to helping with your gut, as you said.
Yeah, powerful. So it's really turning down the volume means that I get to observe more. I get
Hmm.
to not be so much of a projecting energy and go and
Right.
drive and build and create and do, and
Yes.
rather be more of an intro. Like it's almost like being introspective, but from observing the outside. It's like, okay, take it all in, and then
Yes.
how does this register to me now?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And here's an interesting way to know sometimes if somebody's listening.
Hmm.
Is somebody worked for me in advertising and in my advertising years, and I would talk to him and he would sit quietly for a second
Hmm.
and there would be a pause
Well,
and then he would respond. And for me, I'd be, in my head, I'd be like, oh God, just answer me, right? Come on, answer me. But what he was really doing was truly listening
hmm.
and then thinking about his answer. And and those were in my younger years, obviously. And that was a big mistake on my part
Mm,
that he was using his listening skills to really think and be thoughtful and provide those nuggets and insights.
how do we tap into the gut if we're in a high intensity situation like the boardroom or something like that?
That's a great question. I think it's hard.
Mm,
And in some instances, you're not going to be able to use your gut and you're just
right.
going to have to. But how do you slow down so that you're not reactionary?
Mm,
That's the biggest thing I would say is how can you really slow down the conversation, slow down the thought process in your head? And part of this is the practice before you go into the boardroom,
mm,
right? The practice of the smaller meetings using your gut so that
right.
when you go into a high stakes conversation, then you have that practice. And I think too, even when you're in a high stakes conversation, it doesn't have to just be a one and done win or lose conversation.
Mm,
I always say to people, there's always a chance to go back and have another discussion, right? And so don't put that stress and pressure on yourself
mm,
that it's just win or lose.
mm. Well, tell us more about that. Like how in some of those
Hmm.
seemingly defining moments that it's either win or lose, or keep your
Hmm.
job or lose it, or get the raise or get the promotion or not get it. How do we approach that as well? There's another opportunity for this somehow.
Hmm. So I think part of it first is really being prepared.
Mm, yeah.
And it's taking a step back even before that high stakes conversation to be prepared about all the different scenarios
Mm,
and model them. So
yeah.
sometimes when I coach individuals, coach leaders on a high stakes meeting, we practice.
Totally.
We
Totally.
we model what could happen.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's if you come back with an if it's not about me, you have to take your ego out of this, right? When we think about it from a business perspective, whether it's a raise, whether whatever it is, you have to take a step back and think about, why is it good for the company? It's not always about me, right? I want a promotion. I want a raise. You know, we can go all the way back to the story that I told about when I didn't get the media supervisor title. Well, you know, I was making it all about me. But at the time, it wasn't good for the company. And if I thought about, well, why is it good for the company for me to get promoted? Why is it good that I work on this project? Because I have this specific expertise. That takes some of the high stakes piece out of it, and the I. We want to take the I out, because at the end of the day, the board doesn't care really. You know, right? About me.
Right.
They care about, are we meeting the numbers? And I'm the conduit to that. Not to be harsh about it, but you know, that's the practicality piece of it. They do care. People do care. You know, when we get back to the empathetic piece, but there is a point where we go over.
And it's also being empathetic about the board and about the business, you know, like if you think empathy just applies to, you know, subordinates or teammates, like, well, what about empathy for the corporation? How do you put yourself in the corporation's shoes or the company or the board's shoes of what executive decisions are or, you know, proposals or things are moving forward that we need to get behind, that we need to support, that we need to show we're 100%, you know, in support of and believe in, so that we show that we're behind what the company's behind.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's powerful. I love it. I love it. So what would you say are some other skills that you've seen are essential for being an executive and being a great leader?
Oh, that's a great question. I think, well, there's so many of them, but you know, I think first, it's knowing what's important to the company and culture that you work in, and knowing for yourself too. Let's say that I am a very creative person, but I'm in a company that doesn't value that. Well, then that's a disconnect, right? And part of that too is having the self-awareness to know what my strengths are, what my blind spots are. And I think that's a big piece that I coach on, are knowing what your blind spots are. And we all have them. And
Is there any way
think
we
you
can
don't,
self-identify those? Is there any way we could like figure out what those are? Is a preliminary, hey, you know, like I want to get a grasp on what I might not know that I don't know, right? Like that kind of thing.
So there's three things.
Okay.
First, it's asking for feedback. Asking for feedback from your manager, and asking for, again, specificity, right? Not just the generalities, but something very specific. And I think it's just as important too. You as a manager, you have to give specific feedback to your teams in a way that's not about the I, that it's about solution-based to business. Number two, I think it's about getting a 360, right? And that is where, for people out there, that for all of us to understand, a 360 is anonymous data that people input into in a form, you know, web-based program, or it could be me interviewing people, stakeholder interviews. So getting that anonymous feedback data that you can use to really leverage your strengths again, and then understand what your blind spots are. And then lastly, there's a great assessment, and it's called a Hogan. The Hogan assessment, a lot of companies use for succession planning, for senior leaders, and it's an assessment that helps you understand what your blind spots are, what you do well, what are your derailers, and what motivates you. So there's those types of assessments as well.
Wow. So the blind spots, I heard that we can discover it by immediate feedback saying, hey, team, management, leaders, whatever, what am I successful at? What am I really great at? What are my areas of growth and opportunities for growth to improve on? And then the next level of that is the anonymous feedback from, multiple perspectives, multiple people's perspectives. And then even deeper is like taking assessments and getting training or specific, modalities of, am I a red or am I a yellow or am I green or, Myers-Briggs or what?
Right. That's a fantastic assessment. Yes, absolutely. Some other areas that I coach on, again, I think it's about influence. How do I influence and have my ideas heard in a board meeting? How do I flex? I think that is something in the influencing piece of how do I flex to very different people out there, right? In terms of, flexing too is just how you and I are speaking versus how I might speak with somebody else, right? We all, how do we meet the person where it works for them, right? And there's different, just like DISC, what you talked about before, red, yellow, green. There are frameworks and ideas, and it's really all about practice.
Yeah.
And I get back to that piece about it's a little bit messy sometimes. It's not going to be perfect. It's better to try than not do anything at all. Right?
Wow.
And just really keep learning.
Yeah. And so as an executive coach, your role to facilitate people's leadership and growth is to take all the experience and patterns and, I don't want to say hot buttons, but like issues that could potentially come up and use your experience, your wisdom, your track record and say, hey, I've seen that before, something like that. Here's what I've done in the past that has created, a solution for that. Or have you tried this? Why don't you approach it like this? What about this perspective? So you really just give people that feedback that you've collected along the years and studying too, and learning and reading and going to seminars and learning these different skills. Because like everything you've accumulated is different perspectives on how to view one single thing. You could say, a chair, but because you've gone through so much experience and wisdom, you're like, well, it's oak and it's, 3 shades of stain because it's, had this, and this. And so you get to apply that wisdom and experience that you've gained.
Absolutely. And that's the consulting piece of it. The other piece, so it's the teaching piece from a coaching, but then coaching also is asking the good question, right? And somebody said to me once, what I like to do in coaching is I hold up the mirror for you to look at by asking those questions. So for me, it's a combination of learning and it's a combination of helping the client figure out those answers by asking a good question. Like, when would you sit in that oak chair? How would you like an oak chair to look? Or how would you like a chair to look? Let's not even go to the oak piece yet. So that helps people crystallize. And then I might say, but I'm going to give you some, you give me the ideas first, and then I will give you some ideas. An idea might be, you know what, an oak chair is better to sit in than that cushy bean bag you think you want to have. So it's that combination.
Wow. So how do we ask better questions?
So I like to look at it from the perspective of just being a journalist, asking who, what, when, where questions. I give this practical tip that I typically try to stay away from why questions. If I said to you, so why'd you do that? Well, doesn't it kind of makes you feel a bit defensive, right? Like, well, why did I do that? So, but then I say to everybody, I caveat, any question's a good question. Just ask a question.
Yeah.
And part of that as leaders is having a coaching leadership style so that you're not as directive, right? Because it's hard, right? You don't want people to come into your office and say, so what should I do every single time? It's about teaching people to think. think of the answers first. Doesn't
Mm.
matter if they're wrong. Just come in with a solution and idea, and how do you coach people towards that?
Mm. How do we find the balance between having them self-discover it and being an executive and telling them just get it done? you know?
Ah, right. And you know what so that is a great thought, Chris. It's about high stakes.
Mm,
Really, when it's a high stakes, get it done now,
right.
or this is going to go to the board tomorrow.
Mm,
I am going to be much more directive
yeah.
than giving somebody the time on a long-term project. It's finding that balance of
Mm,
high stakes
mm.
versus a learning piece.
What if leaders who are listening or watching they find themselves to be impatient with that coaching and questioning process? What would your recommendation be for them?
I think part of it is we as leaders need to be thinking of ourselves as teachers and advisors.
Mm,
And part of that is if you slow down, you actually might get an interesting point of view that you didn't think about,
mm,
right? It's not about being the smartest guy in the room, being impatient. It's, again, it gets to flexing
mm.
who you are. Some people are going to take a bit more time to come to you with some really interesting ideas. Some people, it's very quick back and forth discussion.
Yeah.
It's flexing to your team as well.
Mm, that's powerful. In your journey as coaching executives, what would you say are some of the biggest downfalls that executives fall into, like the pitfalls, the common shortcomings, or even blind spots? What would you say are some of the most common that you've seen?
Some of the blind spots, I think the easiest one to say is, I don't believe that this is a blind spot. Uh, you know, Drink it in. I'm great. And I've had somebody say that to me.
Oh my god.
So I think it's being humble enough to know that we all have things to work on first.
Mm,
Right. I think at a certain point too, um, it's hard to take a step back and think about things from a positive intent perspective and to be empathetic about those things. And it's the slowing down piece. And I think too, sometimes blind spots are that we forget that we have to teach and help people learn
mm,
below us, right?
yeah.
Um, I think too, a big blind spot is not listening to the room
Mm,
when you are selling something.
mm,
So I was working with this research and development director, and he was having issues going into the board getting his research budgets approved.
mm,
But when we really went back and dissected what was going on, he would bring in a 50-page deck to the board
mm.
and go through the 50-page deck. But at page 5, they had already said yes.
Oh my
So
gosh.
stop. At page 5, you are stopping, right? You don't need to go through the next 45.
Wow.
So it's really listening and knowing what the room wants.
Yeah. And what would be a question that we would ask that would give us a clear answer on whether to like keep going, or how to listen more effectively, like what would give us a question that would help us tune in to how the room is thinking or feeling?
So I think it's slowing down and listening is
Hmm.
the first step. Because at page 5, the chairman of the board said, "Okay, we're all set. You have the money." But he wanted to continue. The research
Mm.
R&D director wanted to continue, so
Uh-huh.
he wasn't listening.
Wow.
Part of it is listening, and then just asking the broad. I really like broad, open-ended questions. So, what do you think so far?
Hmm.
You can stop in the middle. What do you think so far?
Nah.
Right? And I think too, it's knowing the room. And part of it, what I learned in advertising and from presentation skills, there's many things that we could, talk about from that perspective.
Mhm.
But it's knowing, you know what? Actually, I didn't. he didn't need the 50 pages. He might have only needed 2,
Mm,
right? One spreadsheet and one conclusion page with
mm,
the why. What you know, what's the value, what is the return on this, right?
right.
He might have only actually needed 2 for this board
Mm.
to
It's
make the
it would
decision.
be like looking, like you said, knowing the room. There would be research done on how do they make it, as much as possible. How do they make decisions? What's
Hmm.
important to them? What's important to their company culture? Are they is this executive a analytical executive where he needs to be, lots of data, lots of examples, lots of case
Right.
studies, and like you said,
Right.
knowing the room.
And it's about dissecting meetings after they're finished. What went right and what should we think about moving forward? Because
Mm,
you can't keep hammering
yeah.
on something. I think Einstein had a great quote on that. It's escaping me right now, right? But it's it's really about the dissecting of it.
Yeah, yeah, and the quote I believe is insanity is doing the same thing again and again,
Yes, yes.
expecting a
Thank
different
you.
result.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes, yes. So 100%, it's really like we do debriefing, right? Dissecting, debriefing, same thing.
Yes.
But it's just looking at, hey, what worked? What did I notice? What will I make sure I don't do next time? What will I make sure I put back in next time and or keep in or whatever it might be? Because
Yes.
that's so powerful, so powerful, especially those big meetings. Like, a task might like, putting in data into an Excel spreadsheet that might not need a debriefing, so to speak. But I also do think that reflecting on a daily basis over a
Oh,
day, over the day's work, over the day's projects, what came up in progress, that's
yes.
super valuable too.
Absolutely. And this just came to mind as you were talking is, and what you're talking about also too, Chris, it is don't wing it.
Mm,
You've got to practice.
yeah.
You, I really only know maybe 1% of the people out there can really wing a high stakes meeting.
Right.
So dissecting, preparing, practicing
Mm,
is so important
yeah.
to that, and two, there is a point where there is over practice.
Mm,
And I've seen that happen for some senior leaders when they're going into a board meeting. They've over practiced and then they stumble. It becomes stilted and stale sounding. So you have to find your own rhythm,
yeah.
so to speak, when you're talking
Mm. One of the other
or
questions
giving
I
that presentation.
One of the other questions I had was if there's someone who's listening or watching who's a entrepreneur who doesn't yet have a team or have any subordinates, or someone who's in a corporation and they don't have any subordinates, so to speak, how do
Mhm.
they practice being a leader and prepare themselves and show up as a leader that would, be a good leader, even though they're not necessarily leading any one person?
Right. I think that part of it is first research,
Mm,
watching other leaders in the room
mm,
and understanding like who would I look at as a role model. So the first thing is research. I think two, we can all practice. It's, if you're in a volunteer, if you're volunteering for something, that's leadership, right?
mm,
And I actually think volunteering and leading something outside of work is the best practice that you can have,
yep.
because those people are not paid. So there's things outside of work too that you can use and practice.
Mm,
And I think too, many organizations now are so matrixed, or as an entrepreneur you have to work with, I don't know, the web developer
right.
or whoever that is. That's all leading and motivating people.
Mm, yeah.
So just using every instance to hone how you communicate,
Yeah.
really,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
motivate people and build trust.
Yep. Yeah, I love how you said communicate. I would say that's like the big thing is leadership is in large part communication and having someone's buy-in, having someone's enrollment, having someone own a vision as their own when you know like that's what they need. They need to own this vision to make this project a
Yes.
success. And if it's your web developer, you need them to own that your site has to be damn good and that you need to
Right.
make sure that's communicated and the
Right.
expectations and the timelines and activities and objectives and all of it.
Exactly. Exactly.
I love it. I love it. So, Anne, we're
Exactly.
beginning to wrap up here, and we
Yes.
want to know what are the final takeaways, the final pieces of wisdom and insight that you really want our audience to receive and implement and walk away with from this interview.
Okay. So getting back to, people ask me all the time,
Mm,
what is the secret to being a successful leader?
mm,
And I think it's really actually kind of some of the simplest things you can do is just keep learning.
mm,
And it's listening to a podcast like yourself, or it's reading an article,
mm,
it's reading a blog post, listening to the podcast. It's always continuously learning, because that's where you can get the information to see the connections, to be creative.
mm.
So I think it's really one of the most important things, is the takeaway I say is keep learning.
Mm, beautiful. I love it. I love it. And so people want to know how they can stay connected with you. They're loving your message and what you're all about, and they're potentially wanting to hire you as an executive coach or find out more about your services. How do they do that, Anne?
Sure. So there's two ways that are best to get in touch with me, is at my website, annesugar.com. So it's ANNE, sugar, just like sugar, SUGAR.com. And one other thing that I think is important, again, as it gets back to my learning piece, go to LinkedIn and follow me or send me a message every day. I send out a lot of articles and
Mm,
ideas in my feed for people to just be continuously learning that I think are interesting.
beautiful.
Um, so there's that as well.
Awesome. Awesome. LinkedIn and find you on your website and
Sure.
sugar.com. And thank you so much for showing up today and really contributing your time and wisdom and experience. And I love the questions, love your answers and responses and your stories and what you've seen. It sounds really, really powerful what you do for your clients as well. So thank you so much for coming on and we appreciate you.
And I really appreciate coming on your show today. It's been fantastic
Thank you.
talking to you.
Thank you, Anne. We'll see you soon, okay?
Okay. Take
All right.
care.
Take care.